I'm Jillian O'Brien, and I'm from a little town in northern New York called Lisbon. I am a woman with ALD, and I found this out because my brother was diagnosed with ALD back in 2004, which isn't when I found out that I was a carrier, but I knew that it was a possibility at that time. And I am currently 32 and a wife and a mother of three. So like I said, my brother was diagnosed in 2004 with ALD. And from that point, I knew that being a carrier or a woman with ALD was a possibility, but I didn't end up getting actually tested and getting the results until 2007. So it was quite a few years later. I believe I was 17 at the time that I learned of my diagnosis. There are four main types of ALD. There is the childhood cerebral ALD, which is generally the most devastating type, and without treatment can lead to a very young demise. Then there's the cerebral ALD, which typically occurs at a later age, and is what my brother Joel would have been diagnosed with or was diagnosed with because he was showing signs and symptoms of it at 12 and 13 years old, where the childhood cerebral is much younger. These boys tend to be 4, 5, 6 years old when you start seeing those symptoms displayed. Then there's the adrenal insufficiency, which is also called Addison's disease. You see the bronzing of the skin. They're usually very skinny. And this can cause serious medical problems as well. But in the realm of ALD medical problems, these are much more easily handled. And the Addisons can be paired with the cerebral types. So my brother had Addison's disease, which should have been the first indicator that something was going on with him, but it was dismissed by the doctors. They never looked into that further. Otherwise, things could have been different. So he had the Addison's, and then he also had the cerebral form. The last one is AMN, and AMN is adrenal myeloneuropathy. And this one occurs usually much, much later in age. And we're now finding with this better and more current research that women are experiencing the signs and symptoms of AMN. But this is more like a spasticity of the muscles. So, you know, they're very tense and tight. They have difficulty with their gait and walking, difficulty with bowel and bladder function, things like that. I found out about my family planning options was in a really roundabout way. There was nobody who sat me down and told me, you know, this is what your options are, and this is, you know, the information surrounding those options. So I really found out what my options were when I ended up with a surprise pregnancy at 17 years old, I believe. I was in my first semester of college out of high school, and I was absolutely petrified. I knew that there was a possibility that I was a carrier, but I didn't know. But I knew what ALD could do. I watched my brother's downhill decline, and I knew that that wasn't something that I ever wanted for my children. And so I chose to terminate that pregnancy. And it was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. But it was through that process that I started to figure out I need information. I need to know what my options are. And I need to know what is written in my genes. I need to know what my code says. So I reached out to my doctors and I got the genetic testing done. And I was actually in Florida at the time when I got the call that told me that I was a carrier. And my one dream in life, ever since I was little and had baby dolls, was to be a mother. So I felt extremely devastated and crushed that this one thing that I wanted could never be, or the world told me that it could never be. Um, so I came back home because what else do you do but run back to the place that you feel safe when you need that, that support and that love and that guidance to work through the most difficult aspects of your life. And I started to find more information. I really got a lot more information about my choices when I ended up pregnant again with my now oldest son. I had a wonderful nurse who helped me figure out the process of the genetic testing. So I was able to go to the genetic counselor, and I did something called a CVS, chorionic villi sampling. And through this test, they look at my genes and they look at the fetus's genes, and then they kind of, hatch them out and match them up and see if the baby has the genes or not. And then, so through this whole CVS process, we came to find out that my son did not have the gene and that we would be good to go, and he could have a long, healthy life. So, obviously, when I had my son, I was 20. Um, and I was a poor, broke college student, and um, IVF wasn't an option for us financially. It is extremely expensive, and most insurances in the United States don't cover it unless you have problems conceiving. It really, really bothers me that the people who don't have problems conceiving, but who, like us or like me with ALD, could have a child with serious medical conditions, aren't included as part of that group to financially cover IVF or anything like that. So instead, they allow us to conceive these children naturally, the insurance companies essentially, to pay out millions of dollars in medical expenses after the fact when it comes to fruition that our child has the same genetic disorder that we knew that they could have. It doesn't make any financial sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me morally or ethically. But what what can we do? That's got to be up to the insurance companies to figure out. We also decided to conceive naturally because we wanted our own children. We want our own babies. There's just something about looking into the face of your child and seeing the resemblance, to see those character traits that they have that are of your significant other or of your family members. It For some people that it's not a big deal, but for us, we wanted that. It was important to us. And so that's what pushed us to not adopt. And again, I mean, when you're talking about adoption, you're talking about a huge financial cost. It's none of these options are cheap. To have a child conceived naturally like we did, there was also a financial burden that went along with that insurance companies didn't cover. We had to pay out of pocket for all of the testing and traveling for the testing and medical treatment. And everything. CVS has, or chorionic villi sampling, has a miscarriage risk to start with. So just doing the procedure, there's a risk that you could lose your baby. So that's kind of a big deal. Some other challenges that I faced while I was pregnant was that my doctors didn't know what ALD was. So I walk in there to my OBGYN's office and tell them that I'm a carrier for ALD and that my son or daughter, if it is a boy or a girl, could have it. And they just brushed it off. They didn't take it seriously because it wasn't something that they knew about or, knew how devastating it could be. So the first time, fortunately, I had a really good nurse who helped walk me through everything. After that, I had switched practices and gone somewhere else. But since I had gone through it the first time, I knew what testing I needed. I knew which genetic counseling place I needed to go to. And I knew when things needed to happen. Because with CVS, it's time sensitive. It can only be performed within a certain number of weeks. And if the family is considering termination as an option for unaffected child, there are cutoffs depending on your state that you live in as to when this is allowed versus not allowed. So in New York State, I think it's somewhere between 22 and 26 weeks is the cutoff date for the termination. So you have to be able to do the CVS procedure and then grow all the cells up, determine if it's male or female. From that point, if it's female, they cut everything off. So they won't allow you to find out genetically if your female child is a carrier or not. But if it is a male, then they send out the cells and then they have to grow them up again and wait and then do the whole process of basically looking at the genetics of those cells to know whether or not you have a diagnosis. And this process takes weeks. It can take anywhere from like 3 to 6 weeks, depending on how backed up they are. And there's a lot of different factors that go into it. So if you don't get the testing done within the right time frame, then you may not have your results back within a time frame to be able to make the choices that you should be allowed to make. So fortunately for me, after going through the first time, the second time around, I knew what my timeframes were, but I had doctors who were pushing back against me and were dragging their feet to get me get me these appointments, the referrals to go further and do the rest of the testing. So you got to get nasty sometimes and put your foot down and say, no, I know that I need this and I need this now. And you can't wait. You're not going to make me wait for this because it can end in devastation. And finally, once I was able to get them to do what I knew they needed to do, but they didn't, it worked out. But there's a lot of emotional challenges when it comes to conceiving naturally and going through CVS. It's scary. There's a lot of fear that goes into it. You're unsure of whether or not you're making the right choice, but you're also afraid to love your child as you go through this, especially if you made a decision like I did, or like my husband and I did, to terminate if the baby was affected. So you can't allow yourself to get excited or to love the baby that's growing inside of you, that is part of you, Because what if you lose them? What if you make that choice to let them go to avoid a potential life of suffering? It's really, really difficult, and it challenges you as a person to, figure out who you are and what you believe in and what you think is right. I mean, stress and anxiety, there's so much of it, especially when you're waiting for those test results and you don't know, you just don't know, you know, am I going to be able to move forward with my life and create this family, or is it all going to fall apart again? Um, there's also a lot of guilt. Carriers carry a lot of guilt. You're guilty because you've conceived a life that could have ALD. And with me personally, I watched a life with ALD and the decline and the loss of vision, the loss of hearing, the loss of friends, the loss of a life that he once lived. Is that something I want for my child, who I love more than anything? No, I don't. So to even conceive this child and think that that could be something that could happen to them it makes you feel guilty that you're the bad party in this, but you're not. Okay, let me just say that right now. You're not the bad party. You had no control. But I also felt guilt in a different way because I didn't feel like I had support from my friends and my family getting pregnant naturally. There's this, you knew what ALD could do and you did this anyways. And even though my husband and I chose that we wouldn't have a baby with ALD, unless you explicitly state that to your friends and family, then they don't know and they judge you and they're mad at you. And so I felt guilty hiding my pregnancies from them until we got these results back. And that is hard, to hide that, something that should be such a joyous moment filled with excitement and everything. You're 4 weeks pregnant and you pee on the stick, and it's like, you see these announcements on social media and stuff of all these people who are, waving it in your face, and you can't do it. You have to hide it and wear the baggy clothes and pretend like your morning sickness is bad food that you ate yesterday from Chinese food or something, but you feel really guilty that you can't share with them those exciting moments as they occur. Yeah. So a new challenge that my husband and I have faced now that we have 3 healthy children is the consideration of having more children. We feel like we've won the lottery 3 times already. We had 2 boys, about 22 months apart, and both of them were negative in their CVS testing, and again after they were born. And my daughter was negative with her newborn screening. But if we wanted to expand our family more, what would the effects of the CVS process be on our children? And what would the effects of terminating a pregnancy be on our children? And going through 3 pregnancies, one after another, and having healthy children, is termination something that I can still do? When I've seen the end result of healthy pregnancies, can I say goodbye if that time were to come again? So I feel like it weighs heavily on me, more so because having that firsthand sibling experience of being that sibling of a child with ALD, I felt everything from that sibling's perspective. I still do. But now I have to look at that for my children and decide if that's something that I could allow them to feel. And I, I mean, it's made me the person I am today, the weight of that ALD diagnosis. But is that we want to protect our children always. So is that something I can do to them and ask them to be that strong to work through it? And how do I cope and how do I be a parent when I'm working through all of these emotions and feelings that are devastating? Can I be the same parent I am now if I were to have to terminate a pregnancy and cope with that? Can I be the same parent I am now if I don't choose to terminate that pregnancy and have a child with ALD? And can I devote the same time and energy to them if I had a child with ALD who now has medical appointments almost constantly? So I worry that my kids would be affected in a negative way, but I also worry that my ability to be the best parent that I can be would be affected in a negative way. And that's a huge part of weighing the pros and cons to having a new child, a new life in this world. I am a firm believer that the world works exactly the way that it's supposed to. You may not see the reasons behind whatever is occurring right now, but that hindsight is 2020. And the struggles that you face and the choices that you make will lead you to happiness if you choose them with your heart and your head, and you feel secure in those choices. There are people out there who will support you, who want to support you, who want to give you that information. Seek them out, find them. My biggest dream was to become a mother when I was little. And when I didn't think that that was a possibility, the world works in crazy ways and my biggest dream has come true. But it's because I fought for them through finding that information and being an advocate for myself. And you can be an advocate for yourself too, with that little bit of support and guidance that you can get.